In this module, we're going to look at layout in CSS3 and the CSS3 box model. CSS3 goes well beyond fonts and color. One of the primary questions will be how we lay out the block level elements on the page. There are two major approaches, fixed width or fluid. In fixed width, the width of your page stays the same no matter the size of the window or the width of the browser. In a fluid page, the width of your page responds to changes in the width of the browser. Fixed width is certainly easier to do, but it may not be optimal for a given browser. Fluid is more flexible, but a bit more work. We're going to be working with tags and positioning our tags on the page. We'll use HTML semantic tags where appropriate, and we'll use div tags where we don't have the appropriate semantic tag. To create a column, we're going to set its width, and then we're going to set the keyword float. Let's back up and talk about how you start creating your pages. It always starts with content. Once you know what your content is going to be, you want to identify the boxes. That is, the rectangles that represent the various divs and other block level tags on your page. We'll then use the float keyword to float items into columns or within columns. To make sense of all of that, let's take a look at some CSS3. Let's return once again to the page we've been working on and bring up Opera and take a look at what it looks like right now. There are a few things we'd like to do. First of all, we'd like to take About HTML5 and have it be a column on the right-hand side. To do that, we need to make a couple changes to the HTML itself. When you're creating a column, you want to have the HTML for the column before the main body of your HTML page. So we're going to take the aside out. And move it above the article itself and drop it into place. The next thing we're going to do is give our aside a class so that we can identify the entire aside at one time. So we'll give that the class sidebar. And let's outdent that to indicate that the aside contains these two sections. The second thing that I'd like to do is add a little bit more content to the page itself so that the page is a little bit longer. So let's add two sections to the article. We'll scroll down below the section that has recent books and drop in another section with two paragraphs. Let's save that, return to the browser. We don't expect that to look the way we want, but we do expect to see those changes. And sure enough, the content of our column is on top, and our page is now a bit longer with a little more content. We're ready to create our column. To do so, we're going to take the class that we used for the aside and create some CSS to indicate that that should float to the right. So let's go up to our CSS and we'll add a new rule, which will be sidebar. In the sidebar, we will use the word float, and we will indicate where we want it to float, in this case on the right. Let's set a width for our sidebar, and we'll set a margin on the top so that the sidebar is fit nicely into the page. We also need to mark off the main section so that we can give it a margin on the right that is larger than the width of the sidebar. That will push everything over so that there's room for the sidebar and a small gutter, that is a small vertical blank space. In order to do that, we need to come down to our article, and we're going to scroll down below the aside and find the beginning of the main area that is not within the aside. And we're going to surround that with a div that we can give the class main section. Of course, you can name it anything you like. We'll take the closing div, go to the end, and put the closing div right above the footer. That will cause the main section to stay to the left of our column. Let's save that, return to our browser, and update. That's looking much better already, but they're running into one another. Let's go try adding that margin for the main section. Notice I make the margin larger than the width of the sidebar. Save that. Notice that the column on the right is separated by a small strip of white space. A little hard to see because the background of the column is white. That extra space is created by making the right margin on the main section a little bit bigger than the size of the width of the column. We would like this image to float over to the right and then have the content flow around it. To do that, let's return to the code and add a class to the image itself. We'll scroll down and find the image, set its class equal to image, and then scroll up to the CSS and add an image rule. We're going to set the width of the image here rather than inline as we had before. We'll set the height of the image here, and we'll give it a margin of 5 pixels all around. Most importantly, we will tell it that it can float right, and it will float within the column that it sits. Let's save that, return to the browser, update the browser, and now not only has the image floated to the right, but the content has floated around it. Let's review, this is very important. We did not want the content to float under our sidebar. So we created a div for the main section and gave it a right margin that would keep it away from the sidebar. Here we did want the content to float around the image, so we simply set the image to float right, but this content was not segregated from the image, and no margin was set on this content, although a margin was set on the image, which is why it's not crowding against the right margin or the content on the top or to the left of it. In this module, we looked at layout with an emphasis on creating a column. To create a column, take the content that you want in the column and move it to the top of your HTML. Set the width of the column and set float. Remember to enclose the main section in a div and set the margin for the main section greater than the column width. To float an image, set its width and height, set its margin, and then set float. In this module, we're going to talk about navigation bars. Until CSS3, creating navigation bars could be a lengthy and tedious process. However, with CSS3, it's very straightforward. A navigation bar is really a set of links. A set of links is really a list of the different areas in your site. And lists are implemented with UL tags. The first step is to remove the bullets from the tag. The second step is to eliminate all the padding and margins. You then want to set the display to inline block, which will take your block level tag of UL and make it an inline tag. That is, there will not be a new line between each entry. You're then free to style the links any way you like. You could, for example, remove the underlines and set the color. You might even surround it with a border to create what look like buttons. Let's see how all of that is done. This is what our page looks like right now. Let's add a navigation bar to the top of the page. We return to our HTML file, and you'll note that I've added 3 new files: opinion.html, courses.html, and books.html. They're all the same. They all have nothing but a header, and that header indicates what page you're on. Returning to index.html, we're going to begin by creating an unordered list, which will become a list of links to the various pages we've added. Let's scroll down below the sidebar, but before we get to the main section, and we'll add an unordered list. And let's give that a class so that we can refer to this unordered list and style it accordingly. Within the unordered list, we're going to add some link tags. The first link is to this page, index.html, because presumably this menu would be on every page. The second link is to our books page, books.html. And we'll have 2 more links, one to our courses page and one to our opinion page. If we look at the page now without any styling whatsoever, we see that we've got a bullet list with these links. It has the background because it's in a list, and it's not positioned where we want it. The bullet points are over here. A little bit of style will fix all of that. Let's scroll up to the style section. The first thing that we want to do is to style the menu class itself. We can identify it as the menu class within an unordered list, and our first change will be to set the list style type to none. That one change makes a significant difference. Let's bring back the browser, update, and notice we've eliminated the bullets in this list. Next, we're going to set the padding left to 0, and we'll set the margin left to 0, and we'll set the border bottom to be a 1-pixel border that is dashed, and we'll set the color for that. Let's save that and look at the results. looking much better already. We want to change the style of each LI item. And the first thing we want to do is set the background color to be white. We also want the display to be inline. Let's save that. Once again, return to the browser and update. And that looks considerably better. What we have done is eliminated all of the confusing colors in the background except on the links themselves, and we have set it inline rather than block so that they are next to each other. All that's left is to style the anchor tags. We can do that by saying that we want to style just the anchor tags in the menu. We'll set the background color to a nice neutral color. We'll set the foreground color to 333. Display needs to be inline block. Let's create a border. Once again, a 1 pixel dashed, and we'll set the color to be black. We don't need a border on the bottom, so we'll set that to none. And we'll set the padding to give a little bit of space. We're almost done, but let's take a look at it right now. And go to Opera, Update. You can see why we didn't need a bottom border, because we're going to align it right on the dashed line that runs all the way across. And we have what look like buttons with links in them. We'd rather not have the links in them. We'd rather not have that underline. So let's return to the style and tell it that the text decoration is none. Also notice the color was red instead of the color I wanted because I left out the pound sign. Now we have a valid color. Let's save the page, return to Opera, update. Much better. We now have what look like buttons. When we hover over them, the cursor changes automatically because they are in fact links, and we can navigate to the various pages using our new navigation bar. In this brief video, we took a look at how to create navigation bars. To do so, you use the unordered list. You start by removing the bullets and the padding and the margins. You then set the style to inline block and set the style of your anchor tags to whatever you think looks best.